This is Black and White Makes Gray, a memoir of an interracial childhood by Judith Davidson. Chapter 3. I awoke in the middle of the night, a scream caught in my throat, heart pounding like an antelope about to lose a race with a lion. It was another bad dream. I always awoke at just the last minute, just before I might have been caught, died, eaten by the lion, or something equally terrible. In my dreams, everything else was large, while I was small. I was running and scrambling in landscapes where I couldn't find a single door or escape route. I gulped the air hungrily, trying to slow my racing heart, and then turned to my tried and true methods for getting past the horrible moment. First, I made myself pay attention to the street light shining in the window, creating a calming halo on the edge of the room. Next, I glanced up at the wall with photos of the Beatles from Life magazine, and I was relieved to see Ringo, John, Paul, and George looking down on me like patron saints. Finally, I ran my hands along the border of the black and white quilt and reminded myself that I was awake, and once again, I had escaped the dream and its perils. Across the room, Janet was sleeping soundly, the top of her dark head poking just above the covers, and knew she couldn't hear or feel my fears. I hadn't woken up screaming as I had done other times. The house was silent, meaning there was no arguing between my parents. That didn't happen too often these days, so I should have been grateful, but instead I was still feeling the after effects of the nightmare as little earthquakes of distress rocking my brain. I got up from bed and tiptoed out the door in my bare feet. I turned right down the hallway to the next doorway, my parents' room. I crept in, noting my dad's closet on the left, suits and shirts hanging straight, and my mother's closet on the right, dresses and sweaters slipping off their hangers, hat boxes piled randomly on the shelf above, and a jumble of human smells, sweat, perfume. I glanced beyond at the scene out the window, looking across the breadth of Portland, lights sparkling in the dark, sinewy Willamette, river winding through the middle. I knew it was late from the few lights in homes and buildings downtown and beyond. I turned right again into the attached room where my parents slept, but there was no one in either of the two narrow single beds at right angles to each other. That's when I remembered my father was away again on a camping trip with a friend. But where was my mother? I retreated from my parents' room, standing for a moment in the doorway as I thought about what to do next. Then I stepped forward and hung over the banister, looking down to the first floor, hoping I would see my mother passing through the large hall below as she headed towards the kitchen. But all was dark and silent. I remembered that only a few months before, the Christmas tree, sweet-smelling and twinkling with lights, had been in the same entrance hall. I walked further to the right around the circle of the stairwell, past the little hallway to the bathroom and 4-year-old Virginia's bedroom, stepping down the 2 stairs to the long landing with the cushioned window seat, where I could look out over the woods behind the house. The upright shapes of Douglas fir and other evergreens were dark against the navy sky. I half expected to see a wolf or a werewolf with juicy saliva dripping from its white glistening teeth slink out from the forest where the untamed ivy grew thick. Shivering, I climbed the 2 steps at the other end of the landing, past Randy's bedroom and his half-open door. That's when I noticed the door to the back stairs was open, right between the bedroom Janet and I shared with Randy's bedroom. I walked through the doorway to the 2nd floor landing of the back stairs. One set of stairs curled down, and the other curled up. I remembered last Thanksgiving, when my brothers, sisters, and some friends pulled mattresses onto the stairs, crunching them between the walls to make a kind of toboggan run. One after the other, we threw ourselves onto the mattresses, sliding from the second floor down to the first floor, laughing and screaming all the way. And then we ran up the front stairs to do it again. I was surprised we weren't stopped by the adults. Maybe they weren't paying attention because they'd had too much wine for dinner. I paused, my ears on alert, waiting for a sign to show me which way to go. Then I heard a footstep someplace above me. Who could be upstairs? We often had visitors who stayed with us on the third floor in one or the other of what had formerly been the two maids' rooms, off either side of what had once been the billiard room. Last summer, at this time, we had a whole family of 5 living in the attic while they were house hunting. My mother had been helping them to break through the barriers black families faced in 1965 when trying to find a home in one of the better white neighborhoods of Portland. However, I was sure no one was staying in the attic right now. As if in a kind of waking dream, I tiptoed up the stairs. 2/3 of the way up, there was a landing with a window. Toys were piled on the floor in front of the cushioned window seat, among which I saw my own dear coffee pot. I made a promise to her in my head. I see you, coffee pot. I know where you are now. I will come back to you later. Wait for me. Then I turned the next corner on the stairs, and now I was sure I could hear 2 voices murmuring softly. At the top of the stairs, I entered the old billiard room, now a playroom and dramatical production center, where we staged many fairy tales and stories. Along both sides of the room were built-in benches where, in an earlier era, billiard players must have once waited their turns, studying the game from the sidelines. Since the house had been built in the early 1900s by the fire chief of the city, I could imagine there were important men wearing dark suits and smoking cigars. Now we used the benches as the wings of our theater, like stage left, stage right. However, the voices were not coming from the billiard room, but from one of the former maids' bedrooms, the one that looked out toward the front of the house. I took a step, and my bare foot came down on a small, sharp toy of some kind. I drew my breath in at the pain, and the voices stopped. I approached the partially open door of the maid's room through which I could see the window that looked down on the street, but the bed was hidden behind the door. "Who's there?" called my mother. I stepped forward into the bedroom, walking past the door to a point where I could see the bed. My mother was sitting on the end of the bed wearing a translucent nightgown that revealed her pendulous breasts. There was a man in the bed covered to his waist with a sheet. He was black, well, brown, a chocolate brown, with nubbly ringlets of hair on his chest and a beard and a mustache. He had thick, strong eyebrows over dark brown eyes, ringed by patches of skin that were slightly darker than the rest of his face, giving him a wild expression. He was looking directly and intently at me. It was the trumpet player, Evan Porter. I noticed the trumpet case on the floor by the bed. "I had a bad dream," I said. My mother smiled graciously at me, like it was perfectly normal to find her on the 3rd floor in the middle of the night with another man when my father was away. "We're just talking. Go back downstairs to your bed," she directed me in a calm but firm voice. "I'll check in on you later." I dutifully turned around and retraced my steps, walking carefully down the back stairs and into my bedroom, where I got back in bed and pulled my black and white quilt up to my chin. As I lay there in the dark, I wondered if my mother thought I was sleepwalking. I also wondered if I was sleepwalking. Or maybe it was a dream. But I thought I was awake, and I thought I saw the 2 of them upstairs in the bedroom. Gradually, I fell back asleep, unable to explain or understand what had happened. My mother said nothing about the incidents the next day and in the days beyond, and I said nothing about it to her or to anyone else. However, I couldn't stop wondering if the whole thing had only been a dream. Note to Evan. What made you think you could just come in and upend my parents' marriage? Not to mention upend my life. Were you really attracted to her, or did she just look like potential resource of some sort? Free booze, food, and maybe a place to sleep. Important things for someone who was living as close to penniless as you were. Did it ever cross your mind what it would mean to us, the kids? Or were kids just collateral, the fallout from an affair? I'm struck by the thought that I've always thought the issues of this divorce were about the children, us, my siblings and me. And yet, as you and Mom felt yourself swept away in your passion, did you give us any thought? Although I said nothing, my father learned by other means about my mother's extramarital activities, and this marked the official end of their marriage. When this happened, I experienced a temporary loss of memory. It was as if I fell under a spell, not to wake up again until I had left the great big green house on the hill. I didn't remember my parents announcing they were getting divorced, or either of them talking to us about their plans for themselves or us. I remembered no reassurances or comforting words. I don't remember packing or seeing our things carried into a moving truck. As far as I knew, I had no idea where I would land or with whom I would be living after I left this house. Thank you to Westford Community Access Television for providing facilities and production support, all of which made this podcast possible.